Day 104 on Martha's Vineyard. The Orca, the fishing boat built for the production, is listing 7 degrees to starboard. Water is pooling around the camera dully bolted to the deck. Steven Spielberg, 26 years old, sockless and wet sneakers, is gripping the gunwale and watching the Atlantic pour through a seam in the hull that wasn't there yesterday. Somewhere below deck, a crew member is screaming for the bilge pump. Roy Scheider is standing on his mark in full costume, ankle-deep in salt water, and he hasn't broken character. Robert Shaw is sitting on the stern, flask in hand, watching the chaos like a man who expected it. Richard Dreyfuss is in the support boat 200 yards away, refusing to board the Orca for the 3rd consecutive day. Nobody from Universal is on set. But the phone calls are coming every 6 hours now. Spielberg turns to his first AD and says 5 words. "We keep shooting." Roll camera. That sentence cost Universal Pictures an extra $4 million. It also created the first summer blockbuster in cinema history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Rewind to the moment this entire disaster became inevitable, the day a 26-year-old television director read a manuscript that wasn't even published yet. It was 1973 when producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown optioned Peter Benchley's novel before it hit shelves. They needed a director cheap enough to fit a modest budget and hungry enough to shoot on open water, something no major production had seriously attempted. Spielberg had exactly one theatrical feature to his name, The Sugarland Express. Modest returns. Good reviews. Not the resume you'd bet a studio picture on. But Spielberg wanted it with a desperation that made Zanuck nervous. During their first meeting at Universal, Spielberg didn't pitch a horror film. He pitched fear of the unseen. He told Zanuck, "The scariest thing isn't the shark. It's the moment before the shark." Zanuck signed him that week. The budget was set at $3.5 million. The shooting schedule, 55 days. Both numbers would become fiction. Here's what nobody planned for: the ocean doesn't take direction. Spielberg had storyboarded every shot in his apartment. Precise camera angles, dolly movements, lens choices. He had a 26-page shot list for the water sequences alone. All of it assumed one thing: that the mechanical shark would work. The shark's name was Bruce, after Spielberg's lawyer. Bruce was a pneumatic hydraulic nightmare, 3 separate units, each weighing nearly a ton, operated by a crew of 13 technicians working from a submerged platform. The plan was elegant on paper. Salt water destroyed it on contact. Day 1 of ocean shooting. Bruce sinks to the bottom of Nantucket Sound. 13 technicians spend 7 hours retrieving it. No usable footage. Day 2. Bruce's jaw mechanism locks open. The art department rigs a temporary fix with nylon rope. During the first take, the rope snaps. Bruce's jaw slams shut on the camera housing, cracking the underwater lens. Still no usable footage. Day 3. Bruce won't move at all. Spielberg is now 3 days behind schedule with 0 frames of his main antagonist in the can. Here's what the crew didn't know yet: the studio had already started a list. A short list of directors who could replace Spielberg if the dailies, the raw footage reviewed nightly by executives, didn't improve within 2 weeks. The production settled into a brutal rhythm. Every morning, Spielberg would arrive at the marina at 5:30 a.m., check the weather report, check Bruce's functionality status with the mechanical team, and make a binary decision: shark day or non-shark day. On shark days, the average usable footage was 90 seconds. On a good day. But something strange started happening on the non-shark days. Forced to shoot around his broken star, Spielberg began staging scenes that suggested the shark without showing it. A yellow barrel cutting through the water. Quint's fishing line screaming off the reel. Brody's face as he sees something the audience never does. The coverage shifted from spectacle to implication, from monster movie to psychological thriller. Verna Fields, the editor back in Los Angeles, was cutting the dailies in near real time. She called Spielberg on the landline at his rented cottage, the only phone on the island that reliably worked, and said something that reframed his entire approach. "Steven, the scenes without the shark are better than the scenes with the shark. You know that, right?" He knew. He just hadn't admitted it yet. Meanwhile, the Orca was becoming its own crisis. The boat, built by the production's marine coordinator, was designed to look weathered on camera. It looked weathered because it was barely seaworthy. During a tracking shot in the third week, the portside hull took on water so fast that the camera operator had to hand pass the Panavision rig overhead to a grip on the support vessel while standing in water up to his knees. The footage from that setup, the slightly off-angle, desperate framing, ended up in the final cut. You've seen it. You just didn't know why the camera was shaking. On day 34, a memo arrived from Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal. It wasn't addressed to Spielberg. It was addressed to Zanuck and Brown. 3 sentences: production was over schedule, over budget, and ichthyological difficulties were not an acceptable explanation. The subtext was clear. Find a solution or find a new director. Zanuck read the memo, folded it, and put it in his jacket. He didn't show it to Spielberg for 11 days. The human drama on the Orca was becoming as volatile as the mechanical one. Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss had developed a mutual hostility so authentic that Spielberg initially thought it would serve the film. It did, until it didn't. Shaw was old-school London theatre, a man who learned his craft under Olivier's shadow and believed film acting was a lesser discipline. Dreyfuss was New York method, 26 years old, convinced he was the smartest person on any set. Shaw would drink between setups, not discreetly, and critique Dreyfuss's technique in front of the crew with surgical precision. Dreyfuss would respond by disappearing into his trailer for hours, forcing the schedule to restructure around his absence. One afternoon during the Orca's cabin scene, Shaw improvised a line directed at Dreyfuss's character Hooper. "I don't need some college boy telling me about sharks." The line wasn't scripted. The contempt in Shaw's delivery wasn't calibrated for camera. Dreyfuss broke eye contact, looked directly at Spielberg behind the monitor, and shook his head. "Cut." Spielberg took Shaw aside. What he said wasn't recorded, but the first AD later described Spielberg's body language as a man defusing a bomb with both hands tied. Shaw returned to the set and delivered the line again, same words, but this time aimed at Hooper, not at Dreyfuss. The difference was invisible to anyone who wasn't there. On screen, it played as character tension. On set, it was a ceasefire. But Shaw gave the production something irreplaceable on one of his worst nights. The Indianapolis monologue, Quint's account of the USS Indianapolis disaster, had gone through multiple drafts. Benchley wrote a version. Playwright Howard Sackler took a pass. Screenwriter John Milius contributed material. None of it worked. Shaw, who was also a novelist and playwright, asked Spielberg for one night with the pages. He came to set the next morning with a rewritten monologue and a hangover severe enough that the first take was unusable. Spielberg asked him to come back the following day sober. Shaw did. One take. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. No cuts. Scheider and Dreyfuss weren't acting during that take. They were listening. The camera operator slowly pushed in on a 75mm lens, and nobody in the crew breathed. That monologue became one of the most celebrated scenes in American cinema. It was written by a man who could barely stand the day before. By day 80, the budget had crossed $7 million. Sheinberg was no longer sending memos, he was sending people. A production executive arrived on Martha's Vineyard with instructions to observe and report back daily. Spielberg later described the feeling as directing with someone standing behind you holding a stopwatch and a pink slip. The locals, initially charmed by Hollywood's arrival, had turned hostile. Fishing boats would deliberately cross through shots, their captains waving at the camera. One Martha's Vineyard selectman publicly demanded the production pay damages for disrupting the tourist season, which was ironic, given that Jaws would eventually make people terrified to visit any beach, including Martha's Vineyard. On day 100, the near sinking happened. The Orca was positioned 2 miles offshore for the climactic attack sequence. The scene called for the boat to take on water, controlled flooding, managed by the marine team using internal valves. The valves malfunctioned. Water entered the hull faster than the pumps could extract it. The Orca began listing hard to starboard. Spielberg was on the boat. So were Scheider, Shaw, 12 crew members, and approximately $400,000 in camera equipment. The support vessels were 8 minutes away. For those 8 minutes, the production of Jaws was genuinely in danger of sinking into Nantucket Sound, director, cast, cameras, and all. A grip named Jimmy McGillis climbed down into the flooding engine compartment and manually sealed the valve with a rubber mallet and a wetsuit patch. The boat stabilized. Spielberg, soaked from the chest down, checked the gate on the last shot. The film in the camera was dry. He asked Scheider if he could go again. Scheider stared at him. "Steven, we almost just died." Spielberg, by multiple accounts, paused for about 3 seconds and replied, "Yeah, but did you see how the boat was tilting? That looked real. Can we get that angle again?" They got the angle again. The shoot finally wrapped on day 159, 104 days over schedule. The final budget landed near $9 million, nearly triple the original number. Spielberg drove off Martha's Vineyard convinced of 2 things. The film was either a masterpiece or a career-ending disaster, and he would never shoot on open water again. He kept both promises. Verna Fields performed what editors call a resurrection in the cutting room. She had 250,000 feet of footage, much of it technically compromised by water damage, unstable platforms, and inconsistent lighting from the open ocean. She cut the shark appearances down to a cumulative 4 minutes in a 2-hour film. Every appearance was surgical. A flash of gray skin, a dorsal fin, the mechanical jaw lunging into frame and cutting to black before you could see the hydraulic tubes. The footage limitations became the grammar of suspense. John Williams composed the score in 3 weeks. When Spielberg first heard the 2-note motif, E and F, alternating in the bass register, he laughed. He thought Williams was joking. "That's it? 2 notes?" Williams played the full orchestration. Spielberg stopped laughing. If stories like this, the real ones, the ones the studios never wanted you to hear, deserve to be told, subscribe. Because Hollywood tried to bury this one before the film even opened. Universal opened Jaws on June 20th, 1975, on 464 screens, an unheard-of wide release for the era. The studio hedged its bet with a massive television advertising campaign, another first. Within 10 days, the film had recouped its entire inflated budget. By September, it had crossed $100 million domestic. A number no film had ever reached. By the end of its theatrical run, $470 million worldwide. The summer blockbuster was born, and the film industry's economic model shifted permanently toward event releases. Spielberg was 27 when the film opened. He never returned to Martha's Vineyard. 30 years later, Richard Dreyfuss was asked at a retrospective screening what he remembered most about making Jaws. He didn't mention the shark. He didn't mention Shaw. He said, "I remember Steven standing on that sinking boat, completely soaked, asking if the camera was okay before asking if we were okay. And I remember thinking, that kid is either going to be the greatest director who ever lived, or he's going to get someone killed." He got the first one right. The Orca, that leaking, listing, barely floating vessel that nearly sank twice, was left on Martha's Vineyard after production wrapped. Nobody from Universal came to collect it. It rotted on the beach through the winter of 1975, half buried in sand, while the film it carried played to packed theaters around the world. By the time someone thought to preserve it, there was nothing left but the keel.